What is going on, beautiful people of the world? Today we are back with another Tales of Triumph video. We are going to be discussing the window of tolerance today. Now, Mandy has already discussed the window of tolerance with you guys in a different video, separate, and she talks about things from a little bit from her perspective and a little bit in a very different way to how we're going to be speaking about it today. So she has discussed the window of tolerance from one very sort of clinical point of view. Today we're going to be discussing it from a very physical point of view and how it can actually determine different things. We're going to be going over Dr. Dan Seigel. He is the gentleman who created this. It describes the optimal zone for your arousal. Now, this is not sexual arousal for you little perverts out there. This is about your window of tolerance and actually what you can regulate in terms of your central nervous system and how your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system come into play. Actually, then how that has a determination on your different triggers and how you then respond to different stimulus received through one of your five senses. So I know we have been talking about the central nervous system quite a lot recently, and that's because the central nervous system has such a massive part to play on our physical and our mental health, and people actually have no idea how much our mental health is determined by our central nervous system. So the window of tolerance is used to determine our brain and body reactions to different stimulus, obviously out in the real world, depending on how our triggers are then managed with our stimulus to different things. Like I spoke about last time, I spoke about the smell and the sight of lasagna for me and the smell and the sight of leek and potato soup, for example. Those things then trigger my fight or flight response and then takes me back to where I previously was in terms of my area of what happened to me. That is what, like, one of the biggest things that drags me back down. Obviously, you know, the brain has the capacity to remember every single stimulus that happens to you in your entire life. So there's that aspect to think about. So the window of tolerance essentially is a window, and you have to learn to control whether you live inside your window, what lives outside of your window, and how to regulate this window. So that's what we're going to be speaking about today, the regulation of this window, which is essentially the regulation of your nervous system. Now, the way that your nervous system is regulated is through a variety of different techniques. We did discuss a few different techniques last time on how to regulate the polyvagal nerve, which is a direct nerve that is connected to your nervous system. Today, we're going to be speaking about it more on a generalization, more of a whole, so that you can sort of understand how to regulate yourself on a more daily basis in terms of more general management. So we will go over the discussion. We'll go over the personal stuff for me first, so that you can sort of understand where I come from in this, how this has happened to me, how I've used this to be able to regulate my own central nervous system, and then how I've been able to best serve that in terms of keeping myself in a homeostasis mode rather than being triggered all the time, fight and flight, all those different kinds. So for me very specifically, now this is going to come into a hyper or a hypo arousal. Now this is essentially being stuck on or stuck off of a certain mode your body can be in terms of your central nervous system once a traumatic event has actually happened to you. So it is much like you think. Traumatic event happens and then your central nervous system sort of goes like this in terms of danger, very generally. And then what happens is this traumatic event happens and it's like, whoa, like that all at once. So hyper arousal, as you can imagine, hyper, you're stuck on, you can't switch off, your brain can't switch off, you can't sleep very well, you can be addicted to dopamine and these different without even realizing it. And this is where a lot of these different addictions and stuff can happen from being in a hyper arousal state, because you're numbing the effect of the hyper arousal. That makes sense. And then the hypo arousal, it's flopped dead, is the complete opposite. Now, this is when people go into depressive states, and this is when people have these sort of high anxieties and stuff because they don't want to go back into the hyper arousal. They're very used to being in the hyper arousal. So obviously everybody can have ups and downs. Some people live more in the bottom, some people live more in the top. So I've lived in both. I've lived in both for long periods of my time. When I was traveling, I was in the much more hypo arousal state, and I was just very depressed, and I didn't want to do very much, and I was switched off all the time, and I wasn't concentrating on myself, I wasn't concentrating on my work, wasn't really concentrating on my clients, because I was just very switched off to life. Then obviously before that, I was in a very hyper-arousal state because I was doing drugs all the time, and I was, highly addicted to different stimulus, and I was just trying to switch my brain off of all the things that were going on because I couldn't deal with all of the thoughts and all of the feelings that were happening. So I was using different drugs and alcohol and different things to numb the things that were going on for me, so I could then sort of actually sleep and be able to do those things. So essentially what you're looking for, which is what everybody's looking for, is the optimal state of arousal. Now this is when you are like, again, you're just nice and flowing, your ebbs and your flows, and things happen and you can't always control what's happening, but you're not in that hyper massive like, oh my god, I can't switch off, to the hyper, oh my god, I can't switch on, I can't get out of bed kind of state of mode. And this comes through regulation of actually just understanding what puts you in these different modes at different times and why you then stay stuck in these modes. So these different modes have been, in some of the studies I've looked at, have been linked to different things like ADHD and the different then states of ADHD itself. So you've got your hyperactive ADHD, you've got your inattentive ADHD, and those different kinds of states of mode. And they're again, some of the studies that I've looked at have linked the window of tolerance to those ADHD modes, because now this is just, to me, it's a little bit of common sense, but so hyper arousal is characterized by having excessive amounts of energy. You go like always just on the ball, just doing things, you just physically can't switch off. So with that inability to switch off, then that affects our ability to relax and go back into a rest and digest system. This is why people struggle with sleep, and this is why people are then very hyperactive. But what happens eventually at some point is that you will just completely burn out and you won't have any energy left. Which then leads us to the opposite effect of the hypoarousal, which is where sometimes it happens because we've had too much hyperarousal and we just completely crash. And this comes from a state of just complete overwhelm and not being able to actually do anything. And this is when, like I say, we just crash and we go into those states of just not being able to do anything, not being able to get out of bed, not having any energy for ourselves, for our work, for business. And this is, again, this can then be linked to where depression can be linked to, because people think that they go into depressive states and then they think, oh my god, I can't do anything, I can't get out of bed, I must be depressed. I'm not saying all depression is linked to this, I'm just saying that some cases have been linked to this window of tolerance. There's a variety of different cases, different mental health things that have been linked to the window of tolerance, and actually being able to control essentially your emergency fight or flight, freeze or flop systems. So the more control you have over your body, the more control you have over these different reactions you have naturally anyway. You have to think about going back in time to cavemen, when our ancestors would be running away from lions. Hyper arousal, oh my god, holy shit, there's a lion chasing me, loads of adrenaline, running away, blah, then massive crash because we've had a massive drug stimulus. Again, you look at any drug addict, right? They'll go on a binge, for example. They will have all these, they could stay away for 2 or 3 days, and they'll, be up on different illicit substances, and then they'll have a massive crash. With that crash, with their serotonin and dopamine and all those different natural chemicals in the brain, because they've just been overstimulated for so long. And this is why then people then feel depressed after they've done lots of drugs or heavy drinking and stuff, because it doesn't help your natural receptors in the brain actually regulate your drugs being released properly, like your serotonin and your dopamine and your stress hormone and those different kinds of things. So what you're looking at on screen right now is the hyper-aroused and the hypo-aroused framework that we use to help people in terms of regulation of their actual nervous system. So as human beings, we only have the capacity to stay in one state for so long before the brain and body shifts us into a different state. For example, so we can only tolerate so much pain, fear and anxiety before the brain and body responds and numbs this excessive amount of energy. Similarly, people will only stay in a shutdown state, feeling emotionally deadened, emotionally dead inside completely, before the brain and body shifts us out of this, often by gravitating towards things that make us feel alive again. So this is like this is the whole like going outside and doing things, because you can only stay inside doing that kind of stuff for so long before you need to get up and get moving around and do things that make you feel alive again. This can sometimes lead to people doing very weird and strange things. So like if you've known someone who's always been quite recluse and quite, stay inside, just go down to the pub and do the normal things that normal people do, to then go into a massive depressive mode for like a long period of time, you know, those hypo aroused states for a long period of time, they then might be seeking some sort of hyper arousal, something that's going to really judge their heart and get them moving again so that they can feel alive, so that they don't just feel deadened and, you know, essentially dead inside. So this comes back to self-regulation. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said about regulating your central nervous system and actually being able to regulate these different things. So the easiest way I have found to regulate these different things and allow myself control over my body is plotting a timeline. Now, timeline can be however you want it to be. Okay, I've done a variety of different timelines in my past. You can draw literally a timeline, point A to point B. I've done that on a very big A3 bit of paper, and I've plotted out each individual point of traumatic experiences that I can remember, that I am able to remember, that I want to remember, and I've plotted them over my entire life, right? And when I've plotted those things, I've then tried to go back in time in my own head so that I actually understand what happened during those times. For example, with the whole physical and sexual abuse kind of things, you know, I've studied them in quite great detail, and I've picked apart the things that happened during those times that weren't those horrific actions, if that makes sense. So lasagna and the leek and potato soup were two foods I would always, without doubt, eat at those places where the abuse would happen. Okay, so where that abuse would then happen, those foods directly take me back to that area, right? Another thing is bleach, right? The cleanliness, right? So why I've gone through long periods of my life without being, like, myself is clean, but like not being like a tidy, clean freak, because I know that that then reminds me of that time, right? I know it sounds a bit strange. If you've never experienced things like this, then it's going to sound a bit odd. But I'm hoping for the people who have experienced these things and the people who are following along the series will actually understand that, oh yeah, I do see those different things that are happening. So a timeline has helped me self-regulate so well, because actually being able to plot a timeline, finding out what triggers me, why it triggers me, when it's going to pull me back to, has then allowed me to put the correct tools and techniques in place for those different things, so that when I'm triggered, for example, when I then can't self-regulate, I have those tools and techniques in place so that I can then bring myself back into homeostasis mode. I can bring myself back into the perfect amount of control rather than hyper or hypo arousal. Babette Rothschild, okay, fantastic person to go and have a little look into. She has said multiple times, the body remembers, and it's so true. The body remembers everything. The body keeps the score. And like I said, the brain has the capacity to remember every single little thing that happens to us at every single point of our life. All right? It doesn't mean it's going to, it has the capacity to, because our brain is a wonderful piece of engineering. So the body can remember absolutely everything that happens to you at some point. So now again, this is the body, right? So your central nervous system in terms of regulation comes from a very sort of mental side of things, in terms of when you get pulled back, when you get triggered, when you get sent back to that time, you then need a physical tool or technique to release that pressure, right? So timelines have allowed me to place myself in those times and find out what my triggers are, why it triggers me, when it triggers me to, and now we need to talk about what we do when we get triggered and how to then bring ourselves back into a homeostasis mode rather than hyper or hypo arousal. So as you're seeing on screen at the moment, this is how trauma and like the triggers that I'm talking about can affect your window of tolerance, and your window of tolerance obviously is basically your central nervous system. Okay, by having a normal range of your nervous system and actually having your window of tolerance within a set range, this is the regulated nervous system photograph, which is brilliant. It sort of shows, so the black lines are your window of tolerance, but essentially they're your windows. You're going either hyper or hypo, and you want to be creating a little wave in the normal range. So now that you understand that, the traumatic side of things and how your trauma can affect your actual window of tolerance in terms of dysregulation, hyperarousal, then again, dysregulation and hypoarousal, I'll leave that on screen while I talk about the different activities that you can do. So when we talk about arousal and we talk about either hypo or hyper, so there's loads of different things that you can do that will affect both and actually help affect many different things when you're either you're in a state of hyper arousal or hypoarousal, and you need to either calm down or you need to wake up, essentially. So there's those two different side of things. Now, the amount of different techniques that there are is actually brilliant, and you'll realize that there's a lot of different techniques that we're going to be speaking about that come up time and time again. That's because they actually genuinely work if you do them. And I mean, sometimes you can do them on a whim and they'll work, but sometimes, most of the time, you can't just do it on a whim. Okay, so like I said, the top number one thing that worked for me to actually be able to, like I say, power is knowledge. I needed to understand why I was doing the things that I was doing, why the things were triggering me, why they were taking me back to certain times. That's where the timeline come into place. The more I understood about myself, the more I understood about my triggers, the more I understood about being able to understand where I was, why I was there, what was triggering me, how it was triggering me, and why I couldn't get out of the state of hypoarousal, why then I needed to do drugs to then calm down, all of these different things, right? The more information you have, the better. So write it down, okay? You can keep a massive logbook of everything that's going on. It's be brilliant for you. You can look back on it in years to come and you can understand all of these different things, and you actually then keeps a log of all the progress you've made, okay? So I'll blow these up on screen so you can actually have a look at it as well. So the activities, we'll just read through them together. Diaphragmic breathing. So Wim Hof, if you've ever heard of Wim Hof, please go and check him out. He's absolutely amazing. You can YouTube him, follow along with some of his breathing techniques. He's got a variety of different breathing techniques that have absolutely massively helped me either go to sleep, wake up, all these different things, okay? I genuinely get like a high feeling after I've done some of his breathing techniques. Make sure you really listen to him, really breathe into your diaphragm and actually understand the reasons for doing it. You can wake up, you can calm down, all of these different things. Again, by controlling your diaphragm, you can then control everything that's going on. It's a phenomenal piece of information. Drinking from a straw, this again slows down your drinking, doesn't allow you to sort of like chug everything quite as much, so that's a variety, there's different things in there. That personally hasn't worked for me. I've tried it, it's just one of those things that it just doesn't work. Not everything we're gonna talk about has worked for everybody, but at least if I give you all this information, then you can see what does and what doesn't work. Yoga balls, blank wall, so that's the aggression side of things. Yep, sometimes that's brilliant. Another thing that's actually worked quite well for me and works well for some of my clients is a punching bag, or getting some boxing gloves and stuff. And again, high activity exercise works really well, things like that. Heavy work, down the bottom there, lifting, pulling, push-ups, those different things. You can always do push-ups and sit-ups and stuff at home, so that's always really good fun. Shaking or stomping out excess energy. This is like literally like children throwing a tantrum, and believe me, sometimes it does actually work. I have unfortunately, through my aggression over the years, I've got holes in doors, I've got holes in walls, I've got holes in ceilings, all sorts of shit from just throwing, now if I'd have just hit the ground, then essentially I wouldn't have hurt myself, I wouldn't have damaged anything. So there's that kind of tantrum side of things as well, which is really good fun. Don't ever look at it as throwing a tantrum, just look at it as throwing out your excess energy and actually getting all of that energy out into something more worthwhile than you taking it out on somebody else. Warm water, always really cool. I've always liked really warm water. Jumping on a trampoline, again, I don't have a trampoline, never really tried it, but again, that is something that if you jump really high, your adrenaline system is going to kick in because you get that sensation of falling, which then means you'll have a massive crash after that, which means you can really calm down from a hyperarousal state. Weighted blanket, this has worked for so many of my clients. People love like a really heavy weighted blanket and just being under it, because I get the feeling of just not being able to move. Some people hate it. It's never really worked for me personally, but yeah, some people love a weighted blanket and they just feel like completely, especially like if you've not got anybody to hug or hold, then the blanket essentially holds you, which is really comforting. Food, you got to be careful with this one. So comforting food can lead to different eating disorders. Obviously, if you rely on food as a coping mechanism, then food is always going to be there as a coping mechanism, and essentially you might get quite overweight and then obviously in danger of harming your health. So you have to be careful of that one. It's not to say that you can't use it, but you must be careful of using comforting food to actually be able to regulate your hormonal systems, because then you can rely on that, and then essentially that's very hard. Believe me, from being a food addict myself and having gained 3 stone in 3 months, it can be very vicious cycle of eating food, and essentially then you're not doing your internal gut system any good by binging and purging and doing those different kinds of things. But that's a separate topic. Music has been one of those things, still for me to this day, will be for the rest of my life. Music is one of those things that just warms my soul. I have music on as much as I can. I absolutely love it. Depending on what mood I'm in, I'll be at the gym and I can be listening to really calm music, or I can be at home and I can be listening to really screamy music. It really does depend on the day, the time, what I'm feeling, how I'm feeling it, all those wonderful things. So yeah, music's one of those things that's absolutely phenomenal to use if you can use it. Just have a speaker or headphones and different things, and just lose your soul to the music you love. They were the simple activities to regulate your hyperarousal state, but a lot of those, as you can see now, are used to regulate your hypoarousal state as well. And then there's a few other ones on there for your hypoarousal state that actually you'll be able to use separately, you know, because you're trying to wake yourself back up rather than calm down. But like I say, a lot of those things that we just went over do work for both ways. You know, you listen to some music that can really hype you up or really calm you down. There's different things. So definitely try everything you've just seen on screen. Try all of those things. But essentially the main takeaway is just learning, guys. It is a big, long process. Don't think you're going to be able to do this overnight. Take a week. Write, again, the information is key for yourself, you better than anybody. So write everything down. Write as much as you physically can down. Start plotting timelines. Understand, you know, in as much detail as possible with key events. You can, what I did is I did a timeline of all the key events, because otherwise the page would get flooded, and then I would get a separate page. I'd write the event at the top of the page and I'd describe it in as much detail as possible. Yes, it can be pretty grim going back to those places of traumatic experiences and stuff, but you know, from someone who's done it, from someone who's been there, believe me, I felt a hell of a lot better after I did it. Allowed the energy to pass through me, allowed the energy to just sort of like get away from me, and you know, I feel so much better for doing it. I feel like the more I say it, and I know this has worked for other clients I've had in the past, the more you say it, the more that you're able to pass it through your lips and write it down, the less power and the less control it actually has over you as a person. You know, I don't get triggered by anywhere near as many things as I used to get triggered by anymore. I've been able to control my addictions, I've been able to control my food problems, I've been able to control everything that goes on in my life, because I've been able to have that self-regulation of homeostasis, knowing when I'm in a hyper or hypoarousal state, having the tools and techniques to be able to bring me up and down in the right areas of time. So, plot timelines, guys, write everything down, keep track of information, and ensure that you are giving these exercises a try that we went over for the hyper and hypoarousal state, so that you can actually regulate yourself and be able to control yourself in every way possible. Please, it would mean the world to me to give this a like and comment below your thoughts and share this with somebody who needs it. I'm trying to help as many people as I can along this journey of what I've been through, what I teach, and how this can actually help you. So please make sure you give it a like and a comment and a follow, and don't forget to subscribe, and I shall see you next week. I think we're talking about the window of tolerance again. Obviously, go back and check out Mandy's video of the window of tolerance, but this is such a big topic, guys, so make sure you tune in for the next time so that we can discuss whatever we're discussing. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Make it easy, guys. See you in the next one.